Violent clashes between the Turkish military and Syrian Kurds are intensifying. Turkey launched a new offensive against U.S.-backed Kurdish troops stationed near the border 2 weeks ago. Heavy fighting is underway in the Kurdish-controlled city of Afrin. Fears are growing that the fighting will escalate and push east, where the U.S. has a military presence, even though Turkey is a NATO ally. It considers the Syrian Kurds terrorists. The group has been a key U.S. partner lately in the fight against ISIS. For more now, let's bring in James Jeffrey. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Turkey, Iraq, and Albania. James, thank you very much for joining us. I want to ask you first, though, to take us through the situation in northern Syria. What exactly sparked this latest conflict and what's driving it?
Very briefly, the U.S., when it decided to get serious about fighting ISIS or Daesh, this terrorist group, found in Syria its best ally was an offshoot of the Turkish PKK terrorist movement, which is called the YPG. And it's with these forces that we have developed a strong anti-terrorist force in northeastern Syria that was fighting, as I said, ISIS, and is still fighting the remnants of ISIS. Turkey was very unhappy with this because it has been in a 40-year conflict with the PKK and sees, basically correctly, the YPG as the Syrian wing of this movement. However, Turkey understood how important fighting ISIS was to the U.S. It's also important to Turkey. So it allowed us to operate out of Turkey, out of bases in Turkey, even while complaining. Now the situation has shifted. The fight against ISIS is almost over, and the U.S. is signaling it wants to stay on in Syria for a long period of time against the will of the Syrian government, but we don't really accept the Syrian government of Assad, in order to ensure ISIS doesn't come back. But more importantly, as Secretary Tillerson and Secretary Mattis have said, to exert pressure on the political process in Syria and diminish Iranian influence and interest in Syria. Good goals, the Turks buy it. What the Turks don't buy is our continuing the relationship long-term with this YPG. Thus, the Turks went into Afrin, where it is a particular threat to Turkey as it is nestled close to the Mediterranean ports of Turkey, and there's been attacks out of there. But more importantly, the U.S. Has never supported the YPG elements in Afrin. There are no U.S. forces there. The Russians were in there with them. And so the Turks are able to do this without an immediate conflict with the U.S. We'll see what will happen next, depending on how the fighting in Afrin continues.
And do you agree with the administration's approach of continuing to stay there and put the pressure on, hoping the political situation will change?
I do. The funny thing is the Turks do too. They just need to know what the limits of our support for the YPG, that is this Syrian Kurdish movement, is. The Turks fear that the YPG will exploit their relationship with us, basically to, in the long run, hurt Turkey. And the Turks don't know yet what our goals are long-term in Syria against Iran. And frankly, neither do the American people or the American Congress. And this has been an issue of contention with administration witnesses before Congress went on recess at the beginning of January.
James, when you look at this, it's hard to ignore the fact that the Turkish President Erdogan, is up for re-election next year. How do you think that's impacting his new offensive in Afrin and also along the Turkish-Syrian border?
Right. In fact, he might be up for election. He might move the elections forward to this summer. We don't know. It always has an effect because fighting this Kurdish movement, the PKK or the PYD, is a popular action in Turkey. Turks really, Turks of all stripes, including the very large Kurdish minority, in general, the Kurds are split, oppose this movement. So therefore, what he's doing makes him look strong to the Turkish people, and it may be a reason why he'll move forward with the elections. Again, it depends on how successful he is in Afrin.
Do you think that the alliance between the U.S. and Turkey can potentially withstand this conflict? How do you see all this playing out?
First of all, it has withstood 3 years of U.S. close support and coordination with the PYD that led to the formation of a 30,000 to 40,000 strong force called the Syrian Democratic Forces, which are basically Kurdish-led. So it survived that. I think it will survive the Afrin thing because, again, there's no immediate American interest there. If the Turks miscalculate and decide to put pressure on the basic American presence with the Kurds to the east of the Euphrates and in an enclave in the west called Manbij, then there could be real trouble. But at this point, I don't see the Afrin operation causing real problems with the U.S.
James, Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.